Hello and welcome. Bonjour. It's my pleasure to be with you today. My name is Joni Brennan, and I am the president of the Digital Identity and Authentication Council of Canada. So I'm out here in Canada. It's morning in Vancouver, British Columbia, and it's my pleasure to present to you today. We're going to talk about digital identity and some specific research that we've done around people's and organizational perspective with regard to digital identity, specifically in Canada. This research has been done over the course of the year of 2020, and it builds on research that we've also done in 2019. So we'll see some year by year comparison of how perspectives have changed and maybe where they've stayed the same. This is important research from our view because we do speak a lot about digital identity and about verification, and we wanted to validate what do people think? What are their concerns? So let's talk through it. At a very high level, we'll talk through some of these details and stats, but at a very high level, Canadians are concerned about personal data sharing. However, if they find that there is a convenience that they're going to get from personal information sharing, then they're okay to do the sharing. And so we can see, interestingly, that from 2019 to 2020, their interest to share, even though they have concerns, did go up just about by nearly 10%. So we did see some growth, and we'll talk more about the why of that as we go forward. In terms of interest in learning about digital ID, people's interest to learn what is digital ID and what does it mean and what value can it provide to them, well, that interest has increased as well year over year. So when we think about, of course, we think about 2020, we think about COVID-19 and the pandemic, and the majority of Canadians did feel that COVID-19 made it more important that we have secure ways to prove who we are online, for organizations to prove who they are online. So 75% of people who were asked felt very strongly COVID-19 is a big driver here. I'll also note that this survey was performed over the course of 2 weeks, 2,000 people, coast to coast to coast across Canada. And so this is our sample. But yes, people feel COVID-19 is pushing this technology and the demand for it forward. In terms of Canadians, in their concept and would they like to have digital ID? Well, 9 in 10 or 88% said, yes, we want digital ID. We did have to help them to understand a little bit what it is. But the important factor here in this 9 out of 10 is that when explained, people felt happy to move to digital for proving themselves, proving their transactions, if that meant that people who needed telephones and people who needed offices would get even better services. And so the important part of this finding is that often when we speak about something moving to digital from a government or for a business perspective, we think that everyone must move to digital at the same time. Well, here we have strong reassurance that we can move phase by phase, and the people who are digital want to move to digital can move, and that's going to give better service to the people who don't have it. And so that was an interesting nuance that came out. I know that in the pandemic, our phone was early days, we couldn't get through on the phone. So imagine if we could even move part of the population fully to digital identity. In terms of the people who are looking for these digital solutions, these digital identity verification solutions, really it's the people who are taking care of children, the people who are taking care of maybe an adult or a senior in the home, or maybe a senior not in the home. So those caretakers, they really are demanding this the most. Now, if we look at public sector and we look at what governments are doing here in Canada, well, 4 in 5 of Canadians felt that it's very important that government move forward to enable and issue some digital ID that all Canadians can use. They felt that this was just as important for provincial governments, our provinces, to do as it is important for our federal government to do. So strong view from people that governments have a role to play here as well as the private sector. So let's look into some of these numbers and see what's beneath them and how they've changed over time. Now let's talk about that increased desire to learn more about the capabilities of digital identity. Well, we can see that we did have growth in the higher interest areas, And again, something that we call in English the sandwich generation, they are the most high interested. And when we talk about the sandwich generation, those are the people that have both children and seniors that they're caring for. So these are people that are very, very concerned in terms of wanting these kinds of solutions to make their lives easier and more convenient. And we did see that growth from 2019 to 2020. So you can imagine, again, with COVID, these caregivers had even more pressure with children in school, seniors to care for. Is a big driver for them, and they really need it. In terms of looking at that redistribution, moving part of the population to digital identity, while the rest of the population who truly needs it can get better access through that one-on-one support, well, this was strongly supported again by the caregivers, the people who have both children and seniors that they're caring for. And so in any case, right down the line, there was strong support for this kind of step-by-step movement to being able to verify who we are and verifying who an organization is digitally, doing so from home with security and with privacy. Now, in terms of the importance of COVID-19, again, no surprise, the parents and the caregivers feel that this is the space that COVID-19 really put a lot of pressure. And so actually 43% of those polled said, yes, it's much more important now that we truly get to digital as Canada than we don't. So they really did feel the pressure. A very small number, 22%, didn't feel that this made any difference at all, 24% roughly. So look, overwhelmingly 75% said COVID is a pressure here. So we collaboratively need to act and help these people. Now, this is interesting. When we think about privacy and sharing of information, there was actually, from 2019 to 2020, an increase in that willingness to share that information. And so, again, people felt that what was most important is that they had some kind of convenience, something that was going to make their lives easier to transact. And that gave them a little bit less concern about sharing that information. So yes, they do have concern, but they're willing to, as long as they know that it's going to help them in some way. And again, the caregivers are the ones that are feeling the pressure here the most. And so they're happy to give a little more information if they know that they're going to get some support out of it. So that's a little bit on the side of people and what people are thinking. Now, let's move over a bit to organizations. And what we're going to show you is the year-over-year statistics from what people felt in terms of organizations and their trustworthiness in 2019 versus 2020. And so, look, there's very little change here. People feel that healthcare providers, government agencies, and financial institutions are the organizations that they had the most trust overall in terms of keeping their information safe and providing some of these services that we're talking about. So healthcare providers, government agencies, and financial institutions were seen as the most trustworthy by Canadians in terms of what organizations keeping information safe. Now, looking at the credit card networks, and it's actually interesting from 2019 over to 2020, the trust in the credit card companies actually improved somewhat from 2019 to 2020. And so there's more trust in the credit card companies that they can keep the information, the personal information, safe and secure. So that's an area of improvement from 2019. Now, when we're looking at something Canadians trust the least in terms of keeping their personal information safe for digital identity, they have the least trust in social media sites, travel sites, internet providers, and retail companies. And so if we're looking into the 2019 statistics versus the 2020 statistics, we can see, again, not a lot of trust in these types of organizations, that they will keep their information safe and that they should be trusted to help people perform these kinds of digital identity-based transactions. So if we're looking for an area of potential growth. I would say that the area of growth here from an organizational perspective is that social media sites, travel sites, and internet providers and retail providers, they have more work to do to earn people's trust with keeping that information safe. Whereas the healthcare providers and the banks and those financial institutions were much more trusted by people overall. So this is an area where there is some work to be done in terms of building trust for people. So let's take a step back and ask, what do people think? Are they familiar with the concept of digital identity and with biometrics, for example? And this is a question that we ask every year. And I will say what we find year over year is that there is work to be done in terms of the familiarity with digital identity. What is it? Digital identity is a collection of information about you. Some of that information is something you share, and some of that information is something observed about you. So there is some information has more trust and some information has less. And so this idea of what is digital identity, there's still work to be done in there. So year over year, we've had a little bit of increase. People are a little bit more familiar with the concept of biometrics as well as digital identity. But we can see that from 2019 to 2020, we still haven't gotten more than half of people understanding what digital identity is without being assisted in some way. Interestingly, I'll call out again here, the people who did have kind of the most familiarity for what digital identity is are those caregivers, those parents who are taking care of children, and those people who are taking care of adults, either inside of the home or not. So they had the most familiarity, followed by people who are in the age groups from 18 to 34. And so they had the next most understanding of what digital identity is. So again, this is a place where education can and should be done to help society understand, to help customers, clients, citizens understand what is digital identity and what are the benefits. So let's move on to the benefits around what digital identity can provide to people. And so in terms of what people saw as the main benefits, well, the number one, first of all, fraud, decreasing fraud. So reducing this risk of fraud, people see this as a big benefit. There was a little bit of growth from 2019 to 2020 in seeing this as a benefit. Just about the same view in terms of the convenience, the ability for me to easily identify who I am, whether that's with my bank or for my work in the work from home world that the pandemic has driven. About 45% of people felt that it provides an easy way to do this. And so that didn't change from one year to the next. In terms of looking at digital identity's ability to increase people's privacy, well, here's where some view of this went down. They see this as less of a benefit from 2019 to 2020. So there's work for us to do in terms of making clear how a digital identity solution can actually help to protect people's information and empower them with their information. Work to be done. In terms of more benefits, we look at the reduction of the risk of data breaches. Interestingly, just about the same from 2019 to 2020, 39 to 40% of people saw reducing the risk of data breach as a benefit for digital identity. And then again, back to convenience, we saw some growth in the view that a digital identity will make my life more convenient, going to my bank, making payments, doing all of this from my home and my safety in COVID. So there was an increase in the view of convenience from 2019 to 2020. And then digital identity making my life more efficient, my ability to verify myself online and do this easily. So that's kind of comparative with convenience. And so there was an increase in seeing this as a benefit for why digital identity should be implemented. Now, looking at giving more access, giving me access to better products and better services, this came in quite low. And so in 2019, 18% of people felt that this was a benefit. And this actually went down to 16% in 2020. So there's work to be done to communicate how these services provide that security, provide that privacy, and help people get access to better services there. So that's a gap in terms of the knowledge where we can better message as a community to the stakeholders for what digital identity can do. And then in terms of saving money, this was the lowest on the scale. And so people really didn't see any way that digital identity would save them money. Now, I think this is fair from a people perspective, from what people think with regard to digital identity, because quite often digital identity is something that brings efficiencies to companies, to governments, for them to provide services. And so it may not always be apparent to the client or the customer how that money's saved, but I think from an organizational perspective, it is much more apparent where that savings is. So great to see what people think about the benefits for digital identity year over year. Now, when we're looking at how digital identity should be implemented, what's the best way to move forward? Well, 17% of people who responded felt that government should set up digital identity on their own. This should be solely government-led going forward. Government-led, government-managed. Exactly the same, 17% of people in 2020 felt that private companies should establish digital identity, and they should do this alone. Private companies, digital identity, they would be the managers of this kind of evolution and digital transformation for Canada. Now, 66% of people felt that the best way forward was for governments and the private sector to work together. So this is exciting because this is exactly what we're doing in the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada, the DIACC, where we have over 105 members, public and private sector working together. So for us, in terms of the public and private sector working together to design digital identity that puts people at the center and their benefits, their privacy, their security, this is a validating stat. So 66% feel that the collaboration is the best way forward. So we're very encouraged by this stat in terms of the direction that we're moving. And let's look at that government role. 4 in 5 did want government to move forward. And so if we think about our driver's license or our passports or those things that are government issued ID, yes, people want governments to move in establishing those kinds of credentials for our identity as being digital. And again, the caregiver generation wants to see this the most going forward. Now, it's important to look at as well some specific demographics and some specific key groups. And so we asked people who self-assessed, identified themselves as being disabled in some way. What did they think about digital identity? And so, they were a bit more concerned about their personal information being shared or compromised in some way. And so you can see they were a little more concerned than the average. And then most likely to think that digital identity would save them money. They actually thought digital identity more so would save them money than the average. So some interesting stats from those who self-assess themselves in terms of being disabled in some way. So important to look at those demographics. Now let's spend a little bit of time specifically in what we call in English the sandwich generation. And this was fascinating for us. So if you think about the largest segment of the population, these people who are caring for children and who are caring for an aging parent or a family member, whether that person is in the home or outside of the home, these were really the champions. These were the people who were most interested in learning about digital identity, who saw the benefits and wanted to see this move forward. So when we're thinking about our clients and our customers and our citizens and our residents who would benefit from these services, always keep that in mind, that it's likely going to be this group who are more willing to try these services, who need more of that convenience. They are also still concerned about their information being shared online, but they do see the value and the benefit of how digital identity can help them. And they are very interested to learn more about how, what do they not know about these solutions and how it can help them. They also feel feel, strongly that the public and the private sector should be working together in terms of how to solve this. And when they were reading about the concept of digital identity, after kind of getting a little bit of education, they did feel, hey, if we had digital identity and we could move some people to digital and make more support available for people who truly needed the phone, or once the pandemic is over, people who truly need the office visit, they are very happy to move themselves to digital. So again, we don't have to move the whole population to digital at once. We can move the ones that are ready, and those who can't get digital or are not ready for it would get even better services through the traditional channels. So this is our key group when we're thinking about who is most interested in this space going forward. Now, across Canada, we did some regionality review as well. And so we're a very diverse country, from coast to coast. We're a very large country as well. And so, even inside of Quebec, we have some municipalities that have more than 60 heritages and nationalities that are in them. So a lot of immigration and a lot of different views and different cultures, in the same country. And so we also, as Canada, I think it's worth sharing and noting for the audience, is that we do have, in effect, 14 governments that collaborate. And so if we think about Canada, it's almost like a mini European Union in that sense, because we do have 14 governments that have some of their own autonomy and sovereignty, but they're working as a collaborative, as a federal collaborative that we call Canada. And so when we look at digital identity, we have to respect that maybe a solution in one region maybe built a little bit differently than a solution in another region for digital identity, but that said, the outcome has to be the same. We have to be able to trust the outcome the same way, even if they use some different approaches to work with their community and the familiarity and the education of their community. And so when it comes to digital identity, it was interesting that Ontario, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, from our provincial perspective, had really the highest knowledge in terms of what digital identity meant. And so Manitoba and Saskatchewan were equally aware in terms of 56%. In Ontario, there's recently been the Toronto region in Ontario, there's been a lot of education on digital identity. So 50% felt that 55 were very familiar. And in Quebec, 39% were familiar what digital identity is. And a lot of work has been done there as well in terms of education and moving forward. Now, looking specifically into Quebec, compared to the other regions, Quebec continued to be the least concerned when it came to personal information being shared or compromised. I mean, they were still quite concerned. And so 2019, 69% were concerned. 2020, 66% were concerned. And so, what we can glean from that is that there has been a lot of education in Quebec as of recent on digital identity. There's been actions that have been taken. There's some new legislation that's going forward. So there was some improvement there. Quebec did want governments and private sector to move quickly. So they wanted to move quickly here, but they were also the least likely to have previously used various forms of digital ID. So some interesting stats from the Quebec side versus the national here in Canada. So we do have all of this research that is available at DIACC, DIACC.ca. All of this research that you've seen today, the 2020 and the 2019 research, is all available in French and in English. So we encourage you to visit. We also have a number of white papers and strategy papers, also all available in French and English. So I would recommend, if you want to learn more about this, you can look at our 5-year strategic plan, which is available from our website. And I would also say, if you're interested in this space, we have 2 papers that I would direct you to. One is Making Sense of Networks for Identity. This is how information would be verified and shared. And that's a great paper for looking at information sharing on networks for identity. And the second one is making sense of digital wallets, which gives a great kind of basis for digital wallets, where they're going, and what people should be paying attention to with regard to digital wallets. So again, I thank you for the time. My name is Joni Brennan. I'm the president of the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada. We are a nonprofit organization. We are about 105 members strong. We have members who are from our governments as well as from private sector. And we have members who are Canadian, but also those who are multinational and not Canadian at all. The work that we're doing here is meant to be based on the global digital economy. And so we invite any organization anywhere around the world who wants to participate or to collaborate with us to get in touch, because we'd love to hear from you. So thank you for taking the time to participate in this, this discussion. And I hope that you have had a great conference, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with this audience. I'm not sure if there are questions.
There is question, in fact. So first, thank you for enlightening us on this topic on digital identity. I believe that the challenges to overcome have been well described, as well as the benefits. There's a question concerning the implementation. So technology-wise, how is digital implemented, and who are the technology partners?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so today we're talking about people's perspectives, but one of the key deliverables, one of the key pieces of work we have at the DIACC is called the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. This is a framework that describes business, legal, and technical processes for how systems can be constructed with interoperability. And so the reason that I raise that is because we believe that the ecosystem for these kinds of solutions will have many different technologies. And so in some cases, some are going to be using some blockchain technologies. In other cases, they're going to be used technologies like OpenID Connect or SAML, Security Assertion Markup Language. Quite often, people now are looking at technology around that's been developing in the World Wide Web Consortium, the verifiable credentials, for example. So all this to say is that there are many technologies that will be deployed, that will be used in the space and architected. So I think we have to challenge ourselves to think about how different technologies work together, and there may be better technologies for one community versus another. And so we should look at that as a vibrant ecosystem. And what's important is, how are the policies applied, and how is the information verified, and that privacy is protected, and that strong cybersecurity is implemented as well.
So, for instance, what would be your recommendation if someone from our ecosystem here in Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes has identified a solution answering to your challenges? What would be your recommendation to get in contact with you? Do you have a marketplace? Do you have a way to get in contact with you?
Yes, so you can get in contact us with different channels. And so we have a contact form in our website. We have a Twitter handle, which is in the screen here. We're also on LinkedIn and Facebook as well. And so get in touch with us through any of these channels. We'd love to see what it is you're doing. We right now have what we call a special interest group, a SIG, and this special interest group is focused on international project opportunities. And so we're talking about where and how credentials can be from Canada, can be shared with countries outside of Canada, with marketplaces outside of Canada, and where Canada can bring in credentials and accept them from regions that are outside of Canada as well. So we'd love to hear about your projects, whether it's in the international context or any idea that you have to collaborate. You know, we're very agile, and so we'd love to hear what it is you're doing and put it into context of what's happening and what we see in the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a great lead to dive into. We have a second question. This is more concerning the sovereign. The question is the following. What do you think about self-sovereign identities? Do you think it is possible to address rules for people without addressing similar solutions for the connected objects?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Thank you. So self-sovereign identity, again, will be one of those kinds of models. And we need to be clear that self-sovereign identity can be implemented in many different ways. And so that's one word for different kinds of implementations that may share some characteristics. And so in the 5-year strategic plan that I mentioned earlier, one of the things we talk about is that we expect a small number of networks for information sharing to exist. And one of these kinds of networks could be a self-sovereign network. When we're looking at self-sovereign, we should look at the kind of technology that it's using. We should look at the kind of governance that it has applied, so that we also understand, is there liability protection, is there redress? And so we should expect that there's going to be different kinds of self-sovereign networks, and there are also going to be trusted operator traditional networks like Visa, MasterCard payments, that they will exist in the same space. So it's very important to look at governance in these kinds of networks. And it's very important to also understand that people need education on how they will be protected or not, and how to manage these kinds of credentials. So there's a lot of education to be done in this space.
Well, I believe there's no more question. It was really great to have you. Looking forward for more discussion. Wishing you a great day. And thank you for this conference.
Thank you so much for having me. I'd love to speak with anyone who's interested, and have a great rest of your conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.